Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics FPL. It's Fran here, and I'm back with my Gameweek 32 team selection. So obviously, last week was a week where I wasn't able to update you guys with my Gameweek 31 team selection, and the good thing was it was a great week for me personally. It was a week where I got 64 points. I don't think the transfers I made were necessarily perfect, but it was a net positive in the sense that the players I had moved in for had actually given me a bit of a benefit and sort of accumulated for a little bit more than the hit and what my previous players would have performed for me. The one detriment of last week, I believe, was just the sort of Tierney injury. That was a big sort of news because that did impact my plans short term and medium term because we were planning to play with Tierney, and I think we were much more confident about the Arsenal defense. That for me was the sole negative really of last week. Alongside perhaps the Salah captaincy not paying off, but I don't think that was a real huge deal because we know the effective ownership of Salah last week was around 180,000 or 180%, sorry. And with Tierney, I think the main thing is it actually does call into question whether or not we want to consider Arsenal assets quite deeply. I already have Ramsdale on my team, um, but I will sort of illuminate you guys on Game Week 31 and how that panned out. I did make this decision to go for Sanchez over Ramsdale. For me, that was a simple decision where Sanchez clearly had a great fixture versus Norwich, and we know this Norwich team has been very incapable of really creating effective chances. The one player who's really capable of doing so is Pookie, but I think Brighton have been very similar to Wolves. If you guys have been listening to my cheat sheets, where I kind of describe them as a Wolves light, where they score a little bit less than Wolves and they also concede a little bit less than Wolves. And I think Brighton are, when they're facing slightly weaker teams, quite defensively resolute, and I thought that's why Sanchez made a lot of sense. The thing with Arsenal was I really didn't expect Tierney to be injured, and that's why I actually did plan and intend on playing Tierney in the previous week. So Weghorst, for example, was going to be my playing forward, and I had Broja on my bench. In the end, though, I actually had to play two players. I was also kind of taking a gamble on Trent just in case he was actually able to play. But as it panned out, of course, Trent didn't play and Tierney didn't play. As I said, with the Tierney injury, I think that has a huge impact on how we visualize these Arsenal assets. And as someone who, for some reason, is in that sort of minor percentage of players who doesn't have an Arsenal midfielder yet, I still would like to sort of maybe move away from that move for now. I think I can only go for that in 33. It makes a lot of sense to actually replace Rafinha in that week where we have the free hit and Rafinha has that sort of blank where Saka can easily play those games. And that's really my plan, right? To move away from someone like Rafinha. Rafinha still has a great fixture this week though, which is why I'm not really intent on going for Saka. And for me, the sort of ceiling of Saka's returns or any of the Arsenal midfielders has dropped a little bit because we know that this team is actually have been incredibly composed in terms of dominating all aspects of play. This Arsenal team used to really struggle in defense and also in transition in terms of keeping the ball and actually dealing with the opposing press. Right now, especially when we saw them play with Tierney and also Tomiyasu, we saw that they were very comfortable and actually starting to develop a very strong style of play and also a very dominant style of play where we saw them overwhelm, especially with the great form that they had leading up to this period where they had unfortunately lost to Crystal Palace, with injury succumbed to Partey in game and also Tierney pre-game, which seems to kind of take him out for the rest of the season. The way things work is I think Tierney will be a focused transfer for me this week. I could also look towards making another transfer this week, but I'll probably describe that a little bit later in terms of how I plan my transfer out for this week, because we know there's going to be that all-important Chelsea versus Liverpool matchup. In terms of Game Week 31, though, Doherty was a great pick. I still thought many weeks ago when I picked Doherty that there was a clear reason why I picked him because he actually had the confidence of the manager. And I think that's an important sign when you're actually picking players as opposed to going for a player like Reguilon, because Reguilon is more of a short-term gamble. Whereas with Spurs, I was beginning to see the signs of them becoming a little bit of a stronger team. And it was great to see that the Doherty pick finally did pan out. Obviously, half the playing population have Doherty, and it's not like it was some sort of secret hidden gem pick, but I think it's just having the faith in your players to play. I saw a lot of people actually bench Doherty, and for me, that was not a great example, especially when you see the way that Conte actually applies and utilizes his fullbacks in the attacking system. We actually saw Doherty have even maybe two chances to score, and I think that was just a perfect sort of telltale sign to say that Doherty really is going to stay in my team for the foreseeable future. And that's sort of what makes me concerned about Game Week 33 as well, because it seems like a lot of people will be sidestepping a lot of their Spurs players, but perhaps most of us have 2 to 3 Spurs players, and they're in such great form with such great fixtures, with exception to maybe Game Week 36, where they still have a double, that it's really hard to maybe opt for that Game Week 33 free hit, because I really feel like your balancing that against going for these single game week players who still will be great and playing for great teams with Spurs, with Liverpool, and with City as examples. Kulishevsky and Son continue their sort of great presence in the team, and it's really great to see that Son has actually found his way around variance in a sense where Kane had been doing very well, and Son I think was struggling a little bit in terms of his finishing and finding his footing, but has clearly found that. I think towards the back half of the season, I'd be very happy to own Son just because he gives me that sort of budget flexibility so that I can actually push forward. And let's say if I take out someone like Tierney my team and maybe upgrade him, then I still have that sort of budget flexibility if I move out of someone like Van Dijk because I'm so clearly going for a big at the back structure right now. With Rafinha, as I said, this is probably his last week. He did look very lively in the previous match, and that makes me just as excited to have him for the next week in Gameweek 32 when he gets to play versus Watford. I thought he looked exceptional in the previous week, and unfortunately, I still think that this is the perfect time to sort of part ways with Rafinha. This will be his last week, and it's kind of that situation where because I don't have a wild card or any other chip beyond a free hit remaining, there's no real reason for me to bring Rafinha back to the team. I think he's always been a very consistent performer in FPL, but we have a lot of great midfield options towards the end of the season. Players like Maddison and Saka just simply have more games than Rafinha, and there's no real argument to say that Rafinha really finds a place in our team when you compare him to the sort of fixture difficulty rating of other teams, and then also just the multitude of fixtures available too. With Broja and Weghorst, it's a situation where I would say, Weghorst looked absolutely woeful versus Everton, and this was a match where Burnley actually scored 3 goals, and that for me is a very big question mark because it leads to a little bit of doubt for my Game Week 32 team selection. His only comparison next week is going to be Dennis in terms of occupying that forward spot. I could also look towards a transfer. We have players like Mateta and Pukki who are quite interesting in the forward positions, and possibly Cucho as well, who people have considered for Watford because of their doubles. But I'm still not entirely sold on Cucho, and I still think that Roy will look towards perhaps a little bit of rotation this week. I'm sort of hoping that he does play Dennis and starts Dennis because I would actually much rather play Dennis just based on the form of Weghorst. If you looked at the underlying stats of the Burnley game, he was completely uninvolved. His XG was something like 0.05, which is shocking for a centre forward and someone that we perceive to be the main threat of this Burnley team, considering their style of play. And the fact that, as I said, he didn't look lively at all calls into question whether Weghorst is really a good pick. And I think when we look at Game Week 33, where he has a double, it might even be a tough decision for me to actually start him over some of the single game week players. As we can see, clearly prioritizing players with single game weeks with quality games and quality players is much more beneficial towards your team. Now, obviously, you still have to play one forward each week, and as a Sun owner, I'm in a little bit of a different situation where I don't have the option of just simply going for Kane week on week. Because I don't have a wild card or a bench boost, I don't really need to look towards changing too much of my forwards. I might want to maybe take a hit if it's to sort of improve the financial situation of, let's say, my midfield, my midfielders or my defenders. But as it stands, I think Weghorst is a huge question mark, and post 33, I'd love to move him on for someone else just because he actually occupies the most amount of cash in my team. And Dennis might have, for example, a double game week where hopefully if he is starting in the next few weeks, he could be useful. Same thing with Broja, where he's a little bit cheaper than Weghorst and also has that sort of game week 33. I'd much rather play Broja because I still think that whenever you watch him play, he is a very lively player, whereas I can't say the exact same for Weghorst. And that's sort of the situation. Overall, it was a very good week. I had players like Barnes come into the team, Broja come into the team because players had missed out, but extremely happy with the state of my team right now. The one question mark, of course, a lot of people that will question me is about Saka and the lack of Saka in my team. The one thing that I'll say is that, unfortunately, I didn't really find the space to sort of put him in my team because I sort of prioritized Barnes over him in the free hit week. And now I don't really find a way of bringing Saka in until 33, as I mentioned, just because Rafinha is a great game, and I find it really hard to take or make a move away from Kulishevsky and Son because I still think that they're at fantastic prices. Son is really performing at a fantastic level, and you won't really find anyone who's as good value at that sort of position where he could be a perma captain. De Bruyne is an option now considering his form, and Salah's going to be another question mark where I think beyond this sort of City game, maybe we'll give him a few chances towards Game Week 36, but there is a legitimate chance where I think some people will be riding the end of the season without Salah, but I'm not going to make that decision just right now. If we now look at Game Week 32, as I said, there's sort of a pool of 12 players that I'm really looking at before my transfers. I do have one free transfer, and I don't really think that this is a great week for me to roll, just because I feel like a lot of players have a bad matchup, or I'm not really interested in playing a certain player. I think this is a great week, for example, to kind of fill that Reece James sized hole in my team, and especially with Tierney being injured, and also Van Dijk not having a particularly good game, and I feel like Van Dijk perhaps not holding such great value in my team. If you notice my cheat sheet, I actually did mention that Van Dijk was someone who did fall this week, because I feel like Robertson holds a lot more value as a fullback, someone who actually contributes in attacking play. And whilst Van Dijk obviously is very capable of scoring an aerial header, you have someone like Matip who seems like he will play the majority of the games towards the end of the season. And if you really wanted to go triple Liverpool, I mean, you could go for Matip, or you could just move towards another Liverpool midfielder. If let's say in the future you were going to dispose of Salah, and I feel like just because of the fact that Matip exists and Robertson also provides more value, I feel like Van Dijk's at that weird position where I feel like I do want to move away from him. And the reason why I want to do that is because I only have 0.2 in the bank. And so if I, let's say, take out someone like Tierney now and move him into Reece James, I only have 0.2 in the bank, and I can't make that transfer from Rafinha into a player like Saka or Madison, who's at 6.8. Right now, Rafinha is worth 6.5 in my team, and I can't make that move with the 0.3 in the bank. I'll just be short money. So I think it makes a lot of sense for me to actually think about moving out of Van Dijk this week and to go into Reece James. The alternative, of course, is that if I look towards an option of, let's say, going for someone like Martinelli, who is a little bit cheaper than Saka, then I could go for Martinelli over Saka in the subsequent week in Gameweek 33, depending on how well, let's say, Martinelli plays in this Brighton game. Because I think this will be a point in the season where Arteta has to sort of pick the form player. And I think Smith Rowe has been slightly underperforming compared to Martinelli. He did get the start over Martinelli last week, but there is a very big possibility that, let's say, if Martinelli plays very well in the Brighton game, he could get 2 successive starts and could hold a lot of value in my team. So right now, as I say, the transfer for me this week, priority-wise, is going to be between Tierney and Van Dijk. The thing about Weghorst and Broja is simply that they will play in Game Week 33, and they will be doubling. So there's a hard way for me to kind of take them out of the team, and I'm not really interested in bringing Pookie this week for Dennis. So I'm kind of going to be taking a chance between Dennis and Weghorst. That's going to be my main decision within the forwards. I feel like Dennis is someone who has a higher ceiling, but we really might be talking between 1 and 2 points here. I think even though Weghorst has a great game on paper versus Norwich, you have to sort of look into how ineffective Weghorst has been for this Burnley team versus some very poor defenses, such as the Everton defense, and how he wasn't really able to sort of make anything out of it. Not to mention that Burnley have actually been looking towards substituting him quite earlier in games, and that's a little bit of a detrimental sign, whereas I think Watford didn't look too effective from the offensive point of view versus Liverpool, but they did look actually quite compact in defense, and I don't think that really means, Dennis is the reason why that is. I think Dennis could easily find a start if, let's say, Roy Hodgson wanted to make a tactical change and maybe insert Dennis into the lineup, maybe dropping João Pedro as an example. So that is a possibility there, where I think that's the main toss-up in the team, because everyone else deserves a start from the midfield position. Everyone else on paper has a good match, or is a fantastic player like Salah, where I think a lot of people will be considering the move away from Salah this week, where you could go into Fernandes or even go for Kevin De Bruyne, which is a little bit of a weird one because it is a mirror matchup, and I feel like that transfer is very strange. I will also say that the City and Liverpool games have always been high scoring, so I feel like there's a great opportunity for Salah to actually find his way on the score sheet, whether it's just simply by getting a penalty and earning that through someone else in the team, or actually his own contribution, because we know even though Salah has not exhibited the best sort of open play form, he is very capable of redeeming himself very, very quickly. And I feel like that's a possibility here within the City game, just like he did earlier in the season when he was red hot. As I said, so Van Dijk and Tierney is going to be the main sort of move where I think about moving towards Reece James, because as I mentioned, with the midfielders, I feel like moving towards Saka right now just doesn't bear much fruit in terms of upside, and I do actually fancy City to score in this game versus Liverpool. So for me, this could be a great week to sort of either bench Van Dijk or transfer Van Dijk out, and that's exactly why I'm going to make the move towards Reece James. By incorporating Reece James into my team, I'll probably put Van Dijk on the bench. The alternative, as I mentioned, is going to be a move towards Tierney. If I wanted to save a little bit more money, then clearly Van Dijk would make way, and perhaps I'll find another way to find another Liverpool player to fit into my team. But I think when you look at the amount of fixtures available for some teams, it does make sense right now to start accumulating these Chelsea assets especially since for the next few weeks, I still think Reece James is going to be a primary defensive option. Watching the Real Madrid game, and I think that the main concern that people will have over this Chelsea team is the form of their defense in terms of their ability to get clean sheets. But I still think, even from the attacking point of view, Reece James still looked like one of the more effective players for Chelsea. And I think defensively, he's very solid. So when, for example, Chelsea moved into a back four versus Real Madrid yesterday, I still thought he defended very well and still found a lot of opportunities to actually provide attacking returns for this team. And versus Southampton, team that have conceded quite a few lately and probably haven't found their sort of best attacking form, I do fancy this as a great week for Chelsea to find their way back into good form through a great Reece James performance. It's either him really or Havertz right now that I think are the best form players. I think even Mount has actually looked quite good. He was criticized for his Real Madrid game, but I actually thought he looked still quite interesting, especially in comparison to some of his peers such as Pulisic. So that is an option there if you guys are looking for differentials this week. But I would really love to bring Reece James to my team just because I think his upside is so high. And we know that he still has a great ceiling, even though this Chelsea team could lose their clean sheet. And that's pretty much why I've gone for Reece James, because he's really proven himself this season. And I think the form is there, but also just his actual class as a player. I will probably make that decision between Dennis and Weghorst and maybe have a rethink about it. But maybe depending on, let's say, some of the press conferences or some of the predicted lineups, I might be making a move between Dennis and Weghorst. I would like to start with Dennis here because, as I mentioned, I think there is a little bit more upside going for the gamble with Dennis. I feel like Weghorst's ceiling really is 2 points. He's looked terrible lately, and we know this Norwich team is still capable of getting a clean sheet or at least reducing the amount of goals that they actually concede. They've been quite consistently losing games, but not necessarily by gigantic margins since Dean Smith has come on. So that's sort of my hope there with this Burnley game, where I imagine Weghorst won't do too much. And I'm hoping that Dennis will be able to sort of capitalize on this Leeds game, which, even though Leeds have found their sort of form under Marsh, or at least picked up 1 or 2 wins, for me, I like the benefit of going for Dennis just because he's a player who could actually score in a more chaotic game. And we know this Leeds team is still leaving quite a few gaps because they're looking to sort of press and attack forwards. And that's sort of my decision making there. Barnes will sort of find his way towards my team. And really, when it comes to the captaincy decision, I think it's very simple, and I'll probably leave that last. In terms of the defense, as I mentioned, I think it makes a lot of sense to sort of have that balance between Cancelo and Trent. These are both fullbacks who can actually find their way to contribute in attacking play. And I feel like when you've been watching these City versus Liverpool games, you will always see that there is a little bit more openness than usual just because these players are playing at their absolute best and they're trying to go and maximize their opportunities to score. And I feel like this season with Cancelo and Trent, you always have the X factor there. Trent's looked really good in his Champions League match, and I know people have been talking about his form as well. Especially looking into Robertson's, for example, assists and his actual genuine, FPL based form. But I think Trent still has the quality, as far as I can see from the eye test, and I think he makes a lot of sense to start over Van Dijk. Because Van Dijk's really only opportunity to score is through a set-piece header. And I feel like City have been actually very consistent in terms of keeping headers out this season. So I don't really see the fruit of actually going for Van Dijk and starting him. So as I said, a great opportunity for me to go for Reece James this week. Last but not least, captaincy, I think, is very, very simple to make. It's going to be for Son. I think Son is clearly someone who has shown exceptional form. We've seen the Spurs side score relatively consistently, especially after that Burnley loss. And Son is someone who's found form. I don't really think there's any reason I would bet against him. Salah is someone who's slightly off form, so I really don't want to take that chance where I'm just going to pick Salah because I'm so afraid of Salah. I'd much rather go for a player that I feel much more confident in terms of his current form, even though I wouldn't put it past Salah to actually, find his way to the score sheet for City. And that's kind of why I'm not transferring Salah out, but also not confident enough to sort of captain him. As far as the other matchups, I think Rafinha, as I mentioned, always has a slightly lower ceiling, but is very consistent. His floor is actually relatively high. The same thing with Barnes, in my opinion. I think Maddison is actually a more explosive player, but Barnes always has a nice floor too. With the fullbacks, I just don't really want to take that opportunity because even though with, let's say, Doherty, I think Aston Villa are very capable of scoring, there could always be a match where this Aston Villa team could keep the scoreline relatively low, and I'd probably rather have my eggs in the Sun basket in such a game compared to Doherty. Reece James is also another great captaincy shout this week. I feel like Tuchel will sort of pick the most informed players for the Southampton match so that they can actually find some form again. And I know he has a full faith in Reece James, who has performed exceedingly well this season under him. So for me, he's another great captaincy opportunity, but I feel like Son makes a lot more sense just because his team has actually been performing consistently well. And that's going to be the sort of problem that Reece James has going for him this week, where a lot of individual players haven't really been finding their best form for Chelsea. So I imagine Reece James's chances to impress will be slightly less than a Spurs team that are like really well gelled right now. And Son finds himself in such great attacking positions in this team. Ramsdale is going to be my keeper. I don't think there's really much of a decision making here between him and Sanchez. I feel like Brighton aren't a very lethal attacking side, as I mentioned, and it's a good opportunity to have an Arsenal player. I'm not really confident in going for two Arsenal defenders heading towards 33. The only gap in my team, as I mentioned, is probably going to be someone like Saka or Martinelli, and that's probably who I'm going to be looking towards making a transfer in Game Week 33. But for now, this is going to be my team for Game Week 32. I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I'll see you guys shortly on the live stream.